Welcome to the Liberal Europe podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Silvestre, and thank you so much for listening to today's episode. And it's my great privilege to bring you today Sean O'Kernin. Sean is the Secretary General of Renew Europe at the Committee of Regions. He was very generous in hosting me at his office in the committee building, which was a great experience, where we talk about the value of the Committee of Regions, the work that liberals do there, but also the publication principles that make cities and communities liberal. And after our main conversation, please stay to hear a little more about the path that Sean took before I got him on the podcast. But now, with no further ado, it's my great privilege to bring you Sean O'Kernin. I'm here with Sean Kernin. Sean, thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Ricardo, thank you very much for the invitation.
Oh, it's a privilege to have you here. Tell us, what is the unique value that the Committee of Regions brings then to the European Union legislative process, specifically ensuring that policies are realistic and fully applicable at the municipal and regional level?
I tell you what, I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask the listeners to think of the place they consider home. So it could be a village, it could be a big city, or it could be, say, a province, a county, or a region, whatever you consider home. And then imagine that you are the mayor or the regional leader. But for the sake of argument, let's just say mayor right now. And over the next few days, imagine you're going around town or the village. It doesn't matter, because for everyone, wherever they live, that is the center of the universe. And it doesn't matter if it's a small rural village or a big city, where you live is the center of your universe. And imagine you're the mayor and you're going around and you're observing how things are working. It could be the public services. It could be how citizens interact between each other, the relations between citizens. It could be events that are planned, such as cultural events, or unplanned, such as accidents or disasters. It could be the infrastructure, physical infrastructure, virtual infrastructure. And as you do that, because you're the mayor, you're thinking, is that working well? Is that not working well? What can be improved? And then I would ask you, think about what European dimension there might be to each one of those things. And I can guarantee you, for the vast majority, you will find a European connection. And then if you find it's a success story or it's not working well, who at the European level should you be telling about the success story or about something that you need in order to improve it? And once you've done all of that for a few days, you will understand what the European Committee of the Regions is all about. So let me explain it in a different way. Everyone's heard of the European Parliament. European Parliament, all citizens, we elect the representatives who are there. And their task, together with the European Commission and with the national governments, is to draft the laws. But what does drafting the laws actually mean? Effectively, what they are doing is they are designing the vision of the European Union. Mm-hmm. They are the designers of the Union. But those laws, that vision for the Union, doesn't become a reality for the citizens unless those laws become implemented or transposed. In the jargon, it's transposed, meaning brought from the European level to the national and then to the regional and local level. It's only, so for the sake of the listener, we could say it's the local and regional leaders who switch on the law. They make it they make it real for the citizens. And that is the case in 2/3 of all European legislation. Mm-hmm. So the local and regional level, the local and regional leaders are the ones who take that vision and turn it into a reality for the citizens. So, in answer to your question, what is the added value of the Committee of the Regions in the whole European Union structure? Well, on the one hand, we are feeding into the designers of the Union, the legislators, a picture of how the Union is functioning on the ground. We're giving them knowledge, data, evidence of what's going well, what's going less well, what are the challenges, what's needed in terms of legislation, and therefore helping them legislate better. And that's why I was saying I invite you and the listeners to go around town imagining you're the mayor, because that is exactly what the members of the Committee of the Regions are doing. They are bringing to the European level that understanding of how the union is functioning on the ground, whichever corner of Europe we're talking about. And the other aspect that they're doing is they're actually helping to activate or initiate that vision and turning it into a reality for the citizens.
If you'll allow me a follow-up then, in your very privileged position, how is this flow? So for our listeners that are now starting to unpeel this onion, what is the flow then from here to the region, from the region to here? Do you like where we are? Naturally, there's always a lot of work to be done, but where we are right now, do you think that we're already in a good place?
Well, I could give you a glass half full or a glass half empty answer, so I'm going to give you both. The glass half full is, as I said, I've been here 21 years, and every year has been different, and every year the role of the European Committee of the Regions has been increasing, its workload has been expanding, its visibility has been increasing, and I have never seen it in a stronger place than it is today. Let me give you two very simple examples so the listeners can get a feel of what I'm talking about. When I first arrived, it was rare for members of the European Commission, European commissioners, to come to the plenary sessions of the Committee of the Regions. Mm-hmm. It was unthinkable to have a prime minister or a head of state come to a plenary session of the Committee of the Regions. Well, now there isn't a plenary that happens without a European commissioner, and even one is very low. Usually we have 3, sometimes even up to 5, and frequently they actually ask us to come because they want to have this discussion and this engagement with subnational leaders. And in the last few years, we have had Chancellor Angela Merkel, we've had President Emmanuel Macron, we've had Alexander De Croo when he was Prime Minister of Belgium, and quite a few others. So that's an illustration of how far the European Committee of the Regions has come in the last 20 years, and a recognition of the role that subnational leaders play. Let me give you 2 statistics. Well, I've mentioned already that 2/3 of EU legislation don't become a reality until subnational leaders switch them on, as it were, implement them. But also, 50% of all public investment in the European Union, all public investment, I'm not talking about just European funding, I'm talking about all public investment, half of it is responsibility of local and regional authorities. So that tells you already that the European Union simply cannot achieve its policy objectives without having a true partnership with subnational government. So that's the glass half full. Glass half empty, yeah, of course, we could always do much more. We are the least funded institution. We are the smallest in terms of staffing. There are 1.2 million elected representatives at local and regional level. To represent that at the European level, it's a huge body of democracy. And we're talking about thousands of liberal mayors, liberal local politicians. I have a team of 8 to be able to represent the voice of those thousands of liberal mayors and local politicians is a huge task, a monumental task. So of course, we could always do more, but we've got some creative ideas.
Really like that expression, the body of democracy. Let's stay with the body of democracy because there's a second layer to it, which is the people. And it is interesting that you're mentioning that we've done all that progress and European Union was built as a subsidiary project. And you're talking about those thousands of leaders, elected leaders, but then there's also the Europeans themselves. What are the channels that are set? It is always also in your mind the person that exactly is walking on the road and is seeing here something can be built. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, everything we do, we're keeping the citizens in mind, and because we're working with local politicians. We know that when they go back home, because one thing I haven't mentioned is the Committee of the Regions functions like a political assembly. So we have political groups, we have our politicians according to the treaty, and they are appointed and they have a task to do, which is to draft reports that are sent to the European Parliament, to the European Commission, to the national governments. And so we negotiate amendments and we draft these reports in policy committees, etc. So we function just like a political assembly. And our official members, they have their job back home. They're the mayors or they're regional leaders, but they have to come to Brussels for these meetings and to vote on these reports. Okay, so they all the time when they leave Brussels to go back home, they're going to bump into the citizens in the supermarket, or when they park their car, or when they're walking through the park with their family, or obviously at City Hall, etc. So they are constantly reminding us, not that we need reminding, but they're constantly reminding us that ultimately their boss is the European citizen. So that is something that's very present in our work on a day-to-day basis, although our target or the people we are most immediately serving are the locally elected politicians. We know that ultimately what we're doing is for the citizens. Now, one of the things that the president of our political group, François de Coster, he's vice president of the region Hauts-de-France, and one idea that he had back in 2017 was that the Committee of the Regions, obviously we have to work with the members who have been formally appointed by their national government, but given that there are 1.2 million out there, why don't we set up a loose network where we can involve local politicians, a growing number of these 1.2 million out there, in our activities in some way or another, without them actually becoming formal members. But let's involve them so that they can, on the one hand, help us have a better understanding of how Europe is functioning on the ground, but equally that they can help to bring to their local communities a better understanding about what is being decided at the European level that will be relevant to their local communities. So this network has now been set up. The European Commission really liked the idea, and we've now set up a joint network together with the European Commission, and we have nearly 4,000 local politicians signed up. So compared to the 1.2 million, that's a small number, but when you think of the membership of the Committee of the Regions was 329, now suddenly we're working with 329 plus almost 4,000 members, and this network is growing by the day. So this is a powerful way to really fulfill that part of the mission of the Committee of the Regions of helping to bring Europe closer to the citizens.
I'm going to put the link on the show notes for this network so that people can follow the work that is being done and participate if they can. Now, you just mentioned that you don't have as much funding as you need. You have a limited team, so human resources is also a factor. If you have a magic wand, how do you see the Committee of Regions then being strengthened in this mandate, having even in a larger intervention in the regions and having that flow of information that you're just mentioning? So what more can be done here at this office where we are right now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We've had debates like this over many years. And there was a time where people were saying we need more powers in the EU treaty. But actually that would just complicate the decision-making process in the European Union, which is already complicated enough. And so there aren't that many people that push for that anymore. Actually, the road that we're now pursuing, the path that we're pursuing, and which we think is really perhaps the most effective and the best added value for the European Union and the other European institutions, is to develop further this evidence gathering from the ground. We have seen it. Let me give you an example. There was January last year, we had an exchange with an MEP of the Renew family over the European Parliament, who was very active on SMEs, developing policy for competitiveness of small and medium-sized businesses. And well, we arranged an exchange with some of our members, and during that discussion, this MEP was Martina Labajova was her name. She's no longer an MEP. She was taking so many notes because she was at the end of it. She said, "This is fascinating. I'm learning what you're doing in your local community, what you're doing, and every mayor is doing something different and unique and innovative." So she said, "Can you give me more examples?" So we said, "Sure, we can." I imagined maybe 3-4 pages of more examples. We ended up putting together a 12-page brochure. It took us 6 months to put it together. And when we eventually presented it to her, she said to François de Coster, our president, she said, "François, you have done in 6 months what we've been asking the European Commission to do for 6 years." And basically, that was the added value and the service that we'd brought to her, a granular and detailed knowledge of what's happening at the micro level throughout the European Union, which was very useful for her. So that's one example, and we're starting to develop within the Committee of the Regions other mechanisms. We just signed a cooperation agreement with the European Parliament last year, where one of the things that the Parliament is asking us to do is developing new instruments and techniques to extract this evidence, this knowledge of how the union is functioning on the ground. So that's the path we're pursuing to really reinforce our mission.
Now, as we're running out of time, there is a book that I have here in my hand right now for our listeners. They will believe me when I say that, but I'm going to put on the podcast show links, which is Renew Europe, Principles to Make Cities and Communities Liberal. I know this is an important tome for you. I want you to please go into it and then also give a little bit of a teaser then so that our listeners dive into that work.
Okay, well, with pleasure, because this is a book that we drafted. It's very simple, very low, very short on text, but it's profound. And it was the idea of one of our former presidents, Bart Somers, mayor of Mechelen, Open VLD. The reason for that is some people make the mistake of thinking that local politics is just about collecting the rubbish and making sure that the pavements and the streets are in good condition. Well, of course, that's important, but ideology matters as well. And we put together this booklet to help liberal mayors understand that there is a way to make cities liberal and to introduce liberal philosophy into the management of a city or a local community. This book has 13 principles. I'm not going to read them all, but just a few, just to give an idea. So principle number 1 is freedom and responsibilities. Principle 2 is free enterprise. Then we have inclusiveness and trust, empowerment and emancipation. Then we have opportunity and social mobility, livability, knowledge, education, culture, smart innovation. That's just a few of them. And I want to give you a taster, you and the listeners, of what this actually means on the ground. How are liberal mayors and leaders transforming their local communities or building these liberal communities? So, for example, smart innovation, which is the last one I mentioned. So just recently, a few months ago, we had another French vice president, regional leader, vice president of the region of Normandy. And what they've done there is they've introduced drones to transport medical samples between 2 hospitals in the region that collaborate. But obviously, sometimes they urgently need samples or organs, etc. So rather than traffic and having to deal with traffic, drones are now being implemented, and they've established a sort of restricted fly zone for these drones, and that's smart innovation, one way. The other principle, knowledge, education, and culture. Well, let me tell you something that not many people know, but European Capital of Culture is an extremely popular European program, but it's also very popular amongst liberal leaders, so much so that 2023, 2024, 2025, 2026, all European Capital of Cultures of those years were liberal mayors. But why is this such an important and liberal program? Because it's not just about culture. European Capital of Culture is about using culture as an instrument of investment and regeneration. And I would really urge anyone who finds that interesting to look at how each one of these cities has been transformed through that program. I could go on. Livability, obviously, loads of liberal mayors are at the forefront of the energy transition, protecting biodiversity. And then finally, one which I really want to mention, and you mentioned also inclusiveness and emancipation, but just so let me two very quick examples, sorry. Entrepreneur in the classroom. This one's about opportunity and social mobility. And we have a D66 leader who already in 2018, Gerdien Nicker, introduced the Entrepreneur in the Classroom, which brings local entrepreneurs to primary school students and encourages them to think about entrepreneurship. So that's opportunity and social mobility, and it has a direct connection to European policy making, because we talk about European competitiveness, and most people think about legislation and big companies, but actually it's also about getting individuals to just set up a business locally in their local community. And last but not least, inclusiveness and emancipation. Lots of liberal mayors are at the forefront of developing LGBT-friendly cities, or Bart Somers, I mentioned him again, mayor of Mechelen, won the prize for best mayor in the world in 2016 for his policies in bringing migrant communities and host communities together so that there was an understanding, helping migrants to integrate in their local community, because that is a missing pillar of the European migration policy that we've been pushing for, and is still unfortunately missing in the rhetoric at European level and national level. But it's the local leaders that are making that integration possible. And I would encourage anyone to look up the Mechelen model that Bart Somers has implemented.
I want you to tell our listeners where they can follow your work online, and also go a little bit into Letters from Brussels. I know that it's active right now. I'm going to put the links on the podcast show notes, but tell us a little bit then to our listeners, if they want to know more about the work you do, where they can find you.
Thank you very much for that. Absolutely. We obviously have a website, which is reneweurope-cor.eu. And then, of course, we're active on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and Blue Sky. And so, Renew Europe. It's different variations of Renew Europe COR on all of those platforms. Also TikTok. And then, yes, we have a podcast called Letter from Brussels. It lasts 15 minutes. It sort of gives stories about the local leaders who are transforming their communities, as well as stories about Brussels, the capital city of our union. The first 14 episodes were just myself narrating the stories, but we've just started a new format, which is audio and video, bringing together other voices as well. My colleague Julia, and the previous episode, the first episode in the new format, also my colleague Andre, and we same idea, stories from the local level, but also the city of Brussels. So I encourage anyone to have a look at YouTube, Letter from Brussels, or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I've been talking with Sean Kernin. He's the Secretary General of Renew Europe. Sean, this was fascinating. As someone that grew up playing SimCity, and I had to make sure that the pavement was done, because otherwise I would lose my citizens. This is a fascinating world. I hope to have you back. And again, also we have Letters from Brussels. So you're doing fantastic work. And thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a real pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. What was the path that you took before I got you?
Well, it was quite a roundabout way. I've been here now in this position for 21 years, actually. I first did a degree in astrophysics.
That is just, let me interrupt you right there. That is just mind-blowing.
Well, it is, but you'd be surprised if I tell you that I actually use it every day, because the reason is physics is about solving problems, and frankly, so is politics. So I actually use the technique of solving problems every day, or certainly almost every day. So I actually find it very, very useful.
You just remind me of Neil deGrasse Tyson. He says pretty much the same thing.
Okay, so I'm in good company. But shortly before I finished the degree, I did graduate, but shortly before, a few months, I decided actually I didn't want to do it professionally. I still have a passion for the subject, but professionally I wanted to do something else. So I did a master's in journalism, became a journalist, worked for Radio France Internationale, Radio France International in Paris, and then for BBC Television in London. And there, I had always had an interest in politics, and I just felt towards the late 90s that it was probably time to get to see politics from the other side. So I got a job working as a press officer and then as an international relations officer for the Mayor of London. That was from 2000 to 2004. The mayor at the time was Ken Livingstone, Labour, but I was there as a civil servant, so I had to work with whichever mayor got elected. And I got to know Lord Tope, Graham Tope of the Liberal Democrats. He was the leader of the Lib Dem group in the London Assembly. One day talking, he said, Sean, I told him I'm actually liberal. And he said, well, listen, you have a very European profile. There's a vacancy coming up in Brussels. Would you like to apply? And I did. And, well, here I am.
Let me just try to sum up. You have a background in astrophysics. You have a background on journalism. And now, in a way, you're a politician, but also working pretty hands-on into what is important in the particular here, where we are at the Committee of Regions. So how do you juggle all these balls at the same time? You just said that you keep going to astrophysics now and then just to refresh, that muscle. And then journalism is another muscle. So tell us a little bit how these things, all this puzzle just fits in.
Well, I'd have to mention something else, and that was that while I was working with the Mayor of London, I did a master's in European politics, University of London, specializing in democratic theory. So when I heard about the job here in Brussels, I didn't know much about the Committee of the Regions, and I hope listeners at the end of it at the end of this podcast will understand more. I hope to convey what it is. I have a huge passion for this institution because, for me, it combines the democratic theory, and I'll elaborate a little bit more about that. So the actual functioning of democracy, communication, because one of the missions of this institution is to bring Europe closer to the citizens and citizens closer to Europe. So there's a big element of communication there. So as a former journalist, and then, well, as I said, politics is politics, and you're putting out fires all the time. So having a scientific approach to that is useful.
This is all for now. I'll be back soon with more podcasts. You can always visit the website liberalforum.eu to know more about the activities of the European Liberal Forum. So until the next episode, let's keep making the world a better place.
You were listening to the Liberal Europe podcast by the European Liberal Forum. This podcast was co-financed by the European Parliament.